Maria never imagined that her life would take such a turn when she married David. She had grown up in a modest home, raised to believe in compassion, loyalty, and standing by family, values she carried into her marriage. David was kind, steady, and loving, and their early years together felt like a dream. David's mother, Eleanor, lived with them temporarily after their wedding. She was an elegant woman, proud and independent, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Though Eleanor kept a certain emotional distance at first, Maria respected her boundaries. She treated Eleanor with politeness, care, and patience, always offering a cup of tea or asking if she needed help, never pushing too hard. Slowly, a mutual respect began to form, but everything changed just a year later. Eleanor suffered a mild stroke. It didn't rob her of her speech or full mobility, but it weakened her body and left her confused at times. Doctors advised that she not live alone. The siblings, David's brother Mark and his sisters Julia and Beth, lived hours away and made it clear they couldn't rearrange their lives to accommodate their mother. Work, children, and personal commitments, they claimed, made it impossible. David wanted to bring his mother home. Maria didn't hesitate. "I'll take care of her," she said. No one asked her to. No one planned a discussion. She just said it because it felt right. From that day forward, Maria became Eleanor's caretaker. It started with small things, helping her walk across the room, reminding her to take her pills, cooking lighter meals. But as Eleanor's condition progressed with age, Maria's role deepened. She began helping her dress, bathing her when she was too tired, massaging her stiff legs at night. Eleanor had good days and bad days. Some mornings she would smile and talk about her childhood. Other days she forgot where she was and grew frightened, sometimes even calling Maria by her late husband's name. Throughout all of this, Maria stayed by her side. She canceled outings, turned down job offers, and postponed dreams. She didn't complain, not once. David offered to hire help several times, but Eleanor refused, and Maria quietly agreed. There was a deepening bond between them. Maria learned how Eleanor liked her tea, light with 1 sugar, and how she couldn't sleep without hearing old radio shows in the background. They began to speak about things that were never spoken before. Eleanor's regrets, her fears, her memories of David's childhood. She told Maria things she hadn't told her own daughters. "You're more my daughter than any of them," Eleanor said one evening as Maria helped her into bed. Her voice was weak, but her words were strong. Maria's eyes welled up, and all she could do was squeeze Eleanor's hand. Still, no one outside really saw what Maria was doing. The siblings would visit once or twice a year, bring gifts, take photos, and leave with warm goodbyes. They never stayed long enough to witness the 3 a.m. emergencies or the emotional toll. Sometimes they even made passive comments like, "You've got it easy staying home all day," or, "She probably likes playing nurse." Maria said nothing. David supported her, but even he couldn't grasp the full weight of what Maria had taken on. His work kept him busy, and while he tried to help in the evenings, most of the caregiving was on Maria's shoulders. He admired her strength, often calling her the heart of this family. But admiration didn't soothe her growing exhaustion. 10. Years passed like this, and while other women her age were climbing career ladders, traveling, or raising children, Maria's days blurred into one long stretch of routines: medication, meals, appointments, cleaning, comforting, repeating. She never resented Eleanor. But there were moments, quiet, tearful ones in the bathroom mirror, where Maria asked herself, "Who am I now?" Her life had been defined by sacrifice, and though Eleanor had given her love and gratitude in quiet moments, the world outside never knew. Maria had no title, no salary, no recognition, just the unspoken promise she had once made in silence. "I'll take care of her." And she did, with every ounce of her strength, with every beat of her loyal heart. But what Maria didn't know was that the woman she cared for saw everything, and one day that silent promise would be answered in the most unexpected way. Eleanor passed away on a gray, rainy afternoon, quietly, in her sleep. Maria had just stepped into the kitchen to warm up some soup when she noticed the silence. A silence so complete it made her chest tighten. She walked into Eleanor's room and knew, even before she touched her hand, that she was gone. There were no gasps or last words, just stillness. Maria sat beside her, holding her hand one last time. Her face was peaceful, the lines on her forehead smoothed, her lips slightly parted as if she had whispered goodbye into the air. Maria cried, not the kind of crying people do at funerals, but a quiet, aching grief. It wasn't just the loss of a woman she'd grown to love. It was the end of a decade-long chapter of her life. David arrived moments later, and he broke down when he saw his mother. They embraced in the hallway, a long shared silence between them. "You were everything. To her?" David whispered into Maria's hair. She nodded, eyes brimming. They organized a small, respectful funeral. Eleanor hadn't wanted anything grand, just a simple farewell. David's siblings, Mark, Julia, and Beth, flew in for the ceremony. They arrived in black suits and dresses, speaking in soft, practiced tones, hugging Maria briefly as if it were a formality. Julia even said, "Thank you for everything you did for her," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Maria stood beside David during the service, holding his hand as memories of Eleanor's laughter, her favorite songs, and her bedtime stories echoed in her mind. She remembered the nights they spent together during storms, how Eleanor would clutch her hand like a child afraid of the thunder. After the burial, everything changed. The siblings stayed behind after the guests left, settling around the dining table like business partners preparing to divide up a company. They produced an old will from a drawer, a document signed nearly 12 years ago, long before Eleanor's health had declined. "It's all pretty standard," Mark said, flipping through it. "The house is to be divided equally among us three. Jewelry, heirlooms, the savings, it's all split," Maria blinked. "But I thought—" "There's nothing in here about anyone else," Beth cut in sharply. "It's a legal will." David stood up. "This isn't right. Maria took care of her every single day for 10 years. She should have something. At least the house." Julia shrugged. "Well, the will says what it says. Maybe Mom forgot to update it. Or maybe she just assumed we'd do the right thing. They didn't." In the days that followed, the siblings began moving Eleanor's things out of the house. Julia took the antique jewelry. Mark claimed the paintings. Beth argued over the china set. They even began talking to real estate agents, planning to sell the house. Maria walked through the rooms in a daze. The same rooms where she'd cleaned Eleanor's bedding, where she'd sat reading to her late at night, where she'd cried after hard days and smiled during better ones. It felt like they were erasing not just Eleanor's memory, but Maria's place in it. David tried to fight them. He contacted a lawyer, but the will was clear and binding. Legally, Maria had no claim. One afternoon, while packing her clothes, Maria found Eleanor's old shawl. She brought it to her face and inhaled its scent. Lavender, the scent of comfort, warmth, and love. She broke down then, alone in the bedroom. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It was the feeling that she had been nothing more than a shadow in Eleanor's life. Useful, but invisible. That after 10 years of feeding, bathing, comforting, sacrificing, and loving, she could be dismissed with a polite nod and a hollow, "Thank you." David watched her quietly as she folded the last box. "I'm so sorry, Maria," he said. "None of this is fair." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't want their apology. I just wish she had told them what she told me, that I mattered." He held her close, but even his embrace couldn't fill the emptiness that had settled in her heart. They left the house that evening, Maria glancing back just once, hoping for some kind of sign that those years hadn't been in vain. But what she didn't know was that Eleanor had left behind something more than just memories. She had left a secret, one that would soon rewrite everything. The move to a small rental apartment wasn't just a change of address for Maria. It was a quiet heartbreak. The old house, though never truly hers, had been her entire world for a decade. Every corner held memories, echoes of her daily life with Eleanor. Now, with just a few boxes and David beside her, she was starting over in a place that felt temporary, cold, and unfamiliar. Maria had spent 10 years building a life around care. She had no resume to boast of, no job history to return to, no savings of her own. She hadn't minded, because Eleanor had once told her, "You'll always have this home." But now that home belonged to others, she was left with nothing but the quiet ache of being forgotten. David did what he could. He apologized often, offered comfort, and even suggested using some of their savings to help her start something new. But Maria didn't want handouts. What she wanted was dignity, recognition, proof that her love and sacrifices had meant something. The siblings, meanwhile, moved forward like nothing had happened. They sold off the house within a few months. Maria didn't go back, not even to say goodbye. It felt like walking into a graveyard of memories that were no longer hers to claim. One day, while David was out, Maria sat alone in their cramped living room, looking at an old photo of Eleanor. It had been taken on her 80th birthday. Maria had arranged the entire celebration, baked the cake, and decorated the living room with flowers. In the photo, Eleanor was laughing with her eyes closed, her hand resting on Maria's shoulder. And yet, to the world, Maria was just the daughter-in-law. Just the woman who helped. She tried distracting herself. She started journaling again, something she used to love before her life became a cycle of care. She wrote about Eleanor, the daily routines they shared, the long conversations, the little moments of kindness and laughter. But no matter how much she wrote, the emptiness wouldn't leave. People around her would often say, "You did the right thing," or "God sees everything." But those words didn't pay rent. They didn't erase the loneliness. They didn't stop the questions in her heart. Why didn't Eleanor update her will? Did she forget? Did she think I wouldn't care about being left out? Maria didn't want to believe that the woman she'd cared for, loved, and nursed through her worst days had simply overlooked her. But what else could explain it? She spoke to David about it one evening. They sat on their small balcony, sipping tea under the pale light of the moon. I keep thinking maybe I imagined it all, she said softly, that maybe she didn't care the way I thought she did. David looked at her, his eyes sad. You didn't imagine it. I saw it. I saw the way she looked at you, how she trusted you. You were more to her than any of them. I wish there was something left to prove that. Maria nodded but stayed quiet. The weight in her chest felt heavier than ever. The next few weeks passed slowly. Maria took on a part-time job at a local community center, helping with elderly daycare. It felt familiar but different. The staff respected her. Some even asked her for advice. For the first time in years, she started to feel seen again, not just as someone's wife or someone's caregiver, but as Maria. Still, at night, the sadness crept back in. She often found herself looking through Eleanor's things, the few she'd been allowed to keep, a shawl, a teacup, a worn-out prayer book. They were small, sentimental objects, but to Maria, they were sacred. And it was during one of these quiet, tearful nights that something unexpected happened. While sorting through an old box of Eleanor's scarves, she noticed the corner of a folded envelope peeking out from under the fabric. Her heart skipped. She pulled it out. It was a letter. Old, yellowing, sealed, and addressed to her. Her hands trembled. Maria stared at it, too stunned to breathe. She wasn't forgotten. Not yet. Not entirely. Maria held the envelope with both hands. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and hope. It felt fragile. The paper aged and delicate, the ink slightly smudged with time. On the front, in Eleanor's familiar cursive, was her name, Maria. Her heart pounded. For a long moment, she just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at it. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. She unfolded the letter slowly, afraid that somehow this piece of Eleanor, this last whisper, might vanish if she moved too fast. The letter began simply, "My dearest Maria, if you're reading this, I've already gone, but I need you to know something important. You were not just my daughter-in-law. You were my strength, my comfort, my light in these last years." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she continued reading. "I know I never said it enough. I know I didn't always show it. But in the quiet, when the world was asleep and you sat by my side reading to me or tucking me in, I thanked God for you. You gave up your best years for me. You became my daughter in every way that matters. I made a mistake, one I deeply regret. I never updated my will after my illness. I meant to. I tried to. But time slipped away, and I thought I had more of it. I didn't. But I want you to know that I didn't forget you. There is something I did manage to do. Ask David to check the safety deposit box at First Harbor Bank. I left instructions there. Something just for you. The others don't know about it. And I hope it gives you some peace. Some proof that you were never invisible to me. With all my love, always and beyond, Eleanor." Maria read the letter 3 times. Every word felt like a balm to her wounded heart. For so long she had felt cast aside, like her years of devotion had disappeared into thin air. But here, in Eleanor's own words, was a confession, a recognition, and, most importantly, an act of love. The next morning, she told David. He sat on the couch, stunned. "I had no idea she left a deposit box," he said slowly. "She never mentioned it to me." "She didn't want them to know," Maria said softly. "She said there are instructions there, something meant for me. They both knew it could be anything. Or nothing. Maybe a small note, maybe some old photos, maybe a few keepsakes. But the hope in Maria's heart wasn't about what was inside. It was the fact that Eleanor had tried. She had remembered. David called the bank immediately and set up an appointment. They agreed to meet with them the next day, with proper identification and the letter in hand. That night, Maria barely slept. She kept thinking about the little things Eleanor used to do, leaving a biscuit under her teacup as a surprise, squeezing her hand during doctor visits, calling her my angel on the rare days she smiled. Those moments had once felt like whispers in a storm. Now they felt louder, heavier, meaningful. She also thought about the siblings, Mark, Julia, and Beth, how they had swept in and out like tornadoes, taking what they could and leaving without looking back. Would they ever know that Eleanor had chosen Maria in the end? Did it matter? The next morning, Maria dressed carefully, almost ceremonially. She wore the cardigan Eleanor had once gifted her, a simple navy blue knit with pearl buttons. David noticed and gently squeezed her shoulder. "She'd be proud," he said. At First Harbor Bank, they were greeted by the branch manager, a gentle older man named Mr. Jennings. After reviewing the paperwork and confirming the details, he led them into a quiet back room. The safety deposit box was small, just a narrow silver drawer locked with 2 keys. Jennings unlocked it with one, then handed David the second. David gave it to Maria. Her hands didn't tremble this time. Inside the box, neatly arranged, were several items. A stack of old photographs. A sealed envelope marked, "To be opened by the bank." A folder with paperwork. Mr. Jennings took the sealed envelope, read its contents, then looked up at Maria with kind eyes. "Your mother-in-law left clear instructions," he said. "This life insurance policy was adjusted 4 years ago. You are the sole beneficiary. The amount is significant." Maria's breath caught. "Significant?" "Yes," he nodded. "Enough to give you a fresh start. A very good one." Maria's eyes welled up, not because of the money, but because, in the end, Eleanor had seen her. She had understood, and in her quiet, private way, she had made sure that Maria wouldn't be forgotten. Maria stood in silence, trying to process the words the bank manager had just said. "You are the sole beneficiary. The amount is significant." It was as if the world had paused around her. The fluorescent lights of the bank buzzed. Faintly overhead, the hum of printers and shuffling papers filled the room. But inside Maria, everything was still. She had expected perhaps a small gesture, a keepsake, or a few $100s tucked away. But this was something far more than she imagined. Mr. Jennings passed her the folder. David sat beside her, speechless, watching as she opened it. Inside were documents for a life insurance policy. It had been quietly altered 4 years ago to name Maria as the sole recipient. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to buy a modest home outright, enough to rebuild her life, enough to erase the financial scars of a decade of caregiving. Maria's eyes filled with tears, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Eleanor hadn't forgotten. She hadn't dismissed the sleepless nights, the endless care, the sacrificed years. She had simply kept her gratitude silent, until now. As they walked out of the bank, the sunlight warmed Maria's face, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. David wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "She really did see you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maria nodded, holding the letter close to her heart. "Yes," she whispered. She did. That evening, Maria sat at the small dining table in their rental apartment, staring at the documents again, rereading the letter over and over. Her heart was full, not with pride, but with peace. For so long, she had believed her efforts had gone unnoticed. She had endured being cast aside by the very people who had only visited Eleanor a few times a year. She had lived with the ache of feeling invisible. And now, with a single letter and a carefully planned act of love, that ache was finally fading. The next few weeks moved quickly. Maria and David hired a lawyer and financial advisor to help them manage the money wisely. They discussed plans, not extravagant ones, but careful, meaningful ones. Maria found a small cottage just outside of town. It had a garden full of wildflowers, a cozy kitchen with yellow curtains, and a porch that looked out over a quiet field. The moment she stepped onto the creaky wooden steps, she felt something stir in her soul. Home. It was hers. Really hers. Not borrowed, not shared, not a room in someone else's house. A space where she could breathe, create, and live freely. She filled it with soft colors and light. Lavender, Eleanor's favorite scent, lingered in every room. She planted roses in the garden and placed a rocking chair on the porch. In the EC bedroom, she framed Eleanor's letter and hung it beside the window. It became her reminder, not of inheritance, but of intention. Meanwhile, the siblings continued their lives, unaware of what Eleanor had left behind for Maria. There was no need to tell them. This was between Eleanor and her. Something sacred, something pure. No legal fight, no shared claim, no bitterness. David moved in with her. Though they had always loved each other, this chapter brought them closer than ever before. He saw Maria with new eyes, not just as his wife, but as a woman who had walked through sacrifice with grace and come out the other side with dignity. They spent evenings cooking together, planting vegetables and reading on the porch. The quiet life they built felt richer than any luxury estate. Sometimes Maria would sit alone with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip behind the trees, and think about Eleanor. She would smile softly and whisper, "Thank you." Because the truth was, Maria never needed riches. She never sought recognition. What she needed was acknowledgement. A simple act of being seen, being remembered, being loved back. And in the end, Eleanor had given her exactly that. Maria's new life in the little cottage was nothing like her old one, but that's what made it beautiful. Each morning she woke up to the soft rustle of trees outside her window, birds singing from the tall branches, and sunlight spilling across her bed. The silence was different now. It wasn't heavy with grief or loneliness. It was peaceful, like the world was giving her space to breathe again. She took joy in the small things, making breakfast with the windows open, planting herbs in clay pots, watching butterflies flutter through the garden. For the first time in 10 years, Maria wasn't rushing to prepare medicine, answer a call from Eleanor, or wipe away tears in secret. Her time, her life, belonged to her now. She furnished the cottage simply, but with love. Soft cushions, warm blankets, photos of her and David. In one corner of the living room, she placed a wooden shelf filled with books. Some were her old favorites, others were ones Eleanor used to love. And on that same shelf, nestled between two picture frames, sat the letter. Eleanor's letter. Framed in delicate gold, the words, "A permanent part of Maria's world now." A symbol of recognition, a promise honored. David adjusted to the new home as well. The man who once felt powerless watching his wife carry the burden alone now stood beside her with unwavering devotion. He helped plant trees in the yard, cooked Sunday dinners, and spent weekends fixing up little corners of the house. But more importantly, he encouraged Maria to rediscover herself. "You've always been giving," he told her one night as they sat on the porch. "But now, it's your time to live." That sentence stuck with Maria. She began doing things she never had the time or freedom to do. She started writing again, not just in her journal, but for others. Short stories, essays, even a blog about caregiving. She called it Silent Hands, Loud Hearts. It became a quiet corner of the internet where people, mostly women, found comfort in her words. She wrote about grief, about sacrifice, about finding meaning in overlooked moments. And slowly, people started responding. They shared their own stories, daughters, wives, friends, all caregivers who felt invisible like she once did. Maria wasn't just healing herself, she was helping others feel seen too. One day she received an email from a young woman who had just started caring for her grandmother. The message said, "Thank you for making me feel like I'm not alone." Maria wept quietly after reading it. That was the kind of wealth she treasured now. Not money, but the connection between hearts. As months passed, she found peace not just in Eleanor's gift, but in the love that followed it. Her life had taken a long, painful road. She had lost herself in service, been ignored by those who should have defended her, and doubted her own worth. But now, every corner of her home whispered the truth. You mattered. You still matter. She and David even welcomed friends over for dinner, something they hadn't done in years. Laughter echoed through the cottage. They told stories under fairy lights in the garden. Maria made Eleanor's favorite apple pie, and they all agreed it was perfect. She didn't bring up the past often, not with bitterness. The siblings never reached out again, and she didn't reach for them either. Some stories didn't need chapters reopened. But when she thought of Eleanor, she thought of the good, the soft moments, the quiet acknowledgments, the late-night smiles. One evening, as the sky blushed pink and orange, Maria sat on the porch alone, wrapped in Eleanor's old shawl. She closed her eyes and whispered, I forgive you for the silence, and thank you for the letter. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. It was about being seen, loved, remembered. That letter hadn't just changed her future. It had rewritten her past. Maria no longer felt like someone who was cast aside. She was a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding grace. A woman who turned loss into strength, who planted new roots in a quiet cottage and let the world bloom again. And every morning as the sun rose and birds sang in her garden, Maria knew she had been the daughter Eleanor chose. And now, she was the woman she chose to become.